Hello, Internet. Welcome to episode 298 of the Assorted Calibers podcast. The Second Amendment podcast is a little bit for everyone. I'm Weer'd Beard, and thankfully, with me tonight, she has an internet connection, so she's able to talk to all of us, and I'm very grateful because she's the greatest hostess in the world, Erin Paulette. How you doing, Erin?
I'm exhausted. My head hurts. There's an extended story for the patrons that's going to come up in a blooper reel, but yeah, the short version is internet was not working for me, but it was working for everything else in the house. I couldn't figure out why. I thought it was a problem with my computer, and after like 7 hours or so work, I finally got it working. The answer was the Wi-Fi router was slowly failing, and the first thing that failed was, I don't know, the part that connected the Wi-Fi to the internet, because my computer could see the router and could connect to it, but it was saying no internet. And then in the process of troubleshooting and power cycling, I think I killed the rest of it. And so after a lot of effort and a lot of yelling and not just a new cable, because I figured if, okay, the Wi-Fi is broken, I'll just get, like 50 feet of Cat 6 cable and connect it. It still didn't work. So then I had to go back and bought a new router. So I spent something like $90 all told to get it up and running, and I've accomplished nothing else today. And so, when we finish the podcast, that'll be a second thing that I've accomplished, thankfully.
Hooray!
But, I'm tired, I'm headachy, I'm stressed. But, as you say, I finally defeated the problem. The metaphor is mixed, but I don't care anymore. How are you doing, Weird?
I'm doing good, actually. That reminded me of the whole long story of you trying to figure out what the heck was going on and why the internet was not getting to your computer. Reminded me of a buddy of mine told me the most evil prank to do to somebody's car. The most evil prank to do to somebody is to take a chicken leg, put it in a peanut butter jar, fill it 3/4 of the way filled with milk, and throw it underneath their bed. You've got a nice, it'll be a few days, but when it goes, it'll go. But he said, take a condom, unroll it, and stuff it down the fuel neck of a car. And the theory being that latex will sink to the bottom will sink in gasoline, and it'll sink down to the bottom. And then when the car gets turned on, the fuel pump will kick on and start sucking fuel, causing a current. And eventually the condom will drift up against the inlet to the fuel pump, and then it'll suck the line dry. The car will sputter and die and run out of power, which will then cause the fuel pump to shut off, causing the negative pressure to be relieved, and the condom will slowly float away, and the person will crank, and eventually the car will start and run normal again until suddenly it loses power and dies. And the premise being that, number one, the fuel pump is buried so deep inside of most cars that it's a it's a challenge to get to. Furthermore, if you're going to deal with the fuel pump, you're going to open up the hatch and just pull the fuel pump out of the fuel tank, and not actually look down into the fuel tank and see if there's actually anything in there. And so the amount of stuff that you will do to that car to try to get it so that it works right, and the chances that you might just get totally frustrated and just sell the whole thing is very, very high. And it sounded like this router was playing similar shenanigans to you.
That's possibly the most evil thing I've ever heard. Wow.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And here I thought the revenge stories of putting half-eaten shrimp in curtain rods was diabolical.
Yeah, that is also diabolical. Oh man, in curtain rods, that's a good one, because you'll smell it, but to get up high enough to actually locate where the smell is coming from.
Yeah,
that's pretty diabolical.
I mean, you'll look at a curtain rod, but you won't really see it. because you don't do anything with it most of the time. You know, what could possibly stain a plastic or metal curtain rod? You just don't think about it. But yeah, if they're hollow, you just pop the ends off and you put the shrimp in there, or caviar, or just something like that that's going to rot and be really smelly.
If it's caviar, may I recommend the caviar of the noble lumpfish? It's inexpensive and it's not very good.
Well, that sounds ideal.
But lumpfish are really cute. Well, as for me, I will just say that I vaguely mentioned that there's some stuff going on that was very, very challenging, and I'll just say that things are definitely starting to sort themselves out in a positive sense, and probably next time you hear me, I'll say things are really good now, but I'm not going to say what it is because it's personal family things. But I'm happy to hear that things are we had a plan and the plan is starting to work out for everyone.
Oh, okay, great.
So shall we get to some news, Aaron?
Yes, let's. And again, I'm warning you, I've got a bit of a headache. It's not like completely rendered me useless, but I'm kind of slow and dopey, so I'm not at my best.
Well, I think half of these news stories you supplied, which are wonderful, and this one was one of them, and I was very, very happy to see this, especially since, as I mentioned, I've been having some. It's just this year has been a lot of ups and downs for me, and my NRA ballot was just sitting on my desk for so long, and it just was one of those. I'd see it and I'm like, I should probably figure out which guys are the guys that are the reformists and vote for those, and all of that, and it was just. And I just never had the energy, and finally I'm like, it's too late. I'm past the postmark date, so oh well. Good luck to you. And
well, fortunately, other NRA members who have maintained their membership and can vote, like unlike me, they didn't do that, and so the NRA board election results are in. Credit to NRA in Danger. That's nraindanger.wordpress.com, and They talked about that all of the reformers that were running for the NRA board got elected. 4 out of 5 of those were running by petition, which means the nominating committee didn't endorse them. And of at this point, I'm just gonna quote: of LaPierre's cheerleaders, 2 out of 3 failed to get elected. Word has gotten around entirely outside the official publications. So this is really, really good. And so, I mean, I'm not gonna read them all, but Phil Journey, Rocky Marshall, Jeff Knox, Owen Buzz Mills. These are good people, and I believe Rick Ector got elected to not the full term, but like to a limited term.
That's good. That's good for him. I have met Rick Ector, and he is one of the. I mean, I gotta say, everybody, most people in the firearms industry, there's very few jerks out there. There's a couple, and we might have mentioned a few of them, but most of them are some of the nicest, most giving people on earth, and Rick Ector is one of them. So that is absolutely great to hear as well. And Ronnie Barrett's on there too.
Okay, I mean, I thought I read what I just said, but apparently he's been elected for a 3-year term. So that's Rick Ector as well. So good for him.
Yeah, so this is a good sign, and I will have to say that part of my lack of motivation has just been I don't need one more thing on my plate to do, and that was just on the bottom of the list. But also, it was on the bottom of the list because I actually haven't voted in the NRA general elections for a number of years now, just because the amount of shenanigans that Wayne LaPierre was playing with it. That what. Who cares? They're cheating. It's not on the level. Why? The solution is not to play the game.
Probably thinking, why bother? It's not going to do any good.
Correct. And it appears that that nature is healing. So this was really, really good news, because again, we have said multiple times, while we have been critical of the actions of the NRA and definitely critical of Wayne LaPierre and his cabal of cronies, it's not a group that we just want to burn. It's not something we just want to throw away. The infrastructure that the NRA has and the establishment and the name recognition and all of that is something that we very well can be used. And if it did crash and burn, we would be able to rebuild partially. I mean, I think Aaron and I, we both had the theory that it wouldn't be one organization would fill the void, but instead multiple organizations would share the load. And that by nature is going to be a weaker position than the monolith that is the NRA. So I hope that it does heal.
Yeah, it very well may. The problem is all the damage that's been done. And I'm not going to touch on this except very briefly because I didn't add it to the show notes. But again, on NRA in Danger, the very next post is, talking about how the NRA Museum has been liquidating its collection and things are going to auction. And so I think we talked about it maybe in a previous episode. And so, yeah, there are a lot of these rare and or historical guns that are being liquidated, and it's probably to pay the Brewer legal firm and all of their bills. So things will never get back to the way they were, but maybe things can be rebuilt into a rough approximation, and hopefully a lot of valuable lessons learned.
I hope so. All right, now for some more good news, and this is like some solid good news, is that April 2024 marks the 57th consecutive month of 1 million plus background checks for gun sales. So
for people who don't want to do the math, 60 months is 5 years. So this is 4.75.
Yeah. So yeah, go ahead.
So, I mean, this actually started before the 2020 panic by probably a combination of the holiday sales, because people buy guns for gifts, and maybe the pre-election, the person I don't like is going to win, I better buy a gun. So, yeah, wow. Nearly 5 years of over 1 million background checks per month. And again, we want to point out, this doesn't mean 1 million gun sales, because if you buy multiple guns, but you only fill out 14473, that's one background check. And also, if you're, well, I guess it depends on the state, but like here in Florida, because I've got a concealed carry permit, I still have to fill out the 4473, but I don't have to have a background check because the state does it for me regularly. So there are even more sales that we're just not counting. But of the numbers that we have, it's a minimum of over 1 million guns per month. Wow. Actually,
Aaron, you made actually a fairly interesting point, too, because this is simply talking about the National Instant Criminal Background Check System. So this is NICS. So it's not necessarily all the various state groups. I don't know if they are also counting those numbers as well, or if it's literally just states like Massachusetts and Maine that call directly into the FBI every time a firearm is sold through an FFL, or if, say, someone who doesn't have a carry permit buys a gun in a gun shop in Florida or Tennessee. I don't know, but either way, yes, this is the low number. Because it's not counting private sales. It's not counting. It's not counting certain transfers for places where people have carry permits, and it's not counting it was several years ago. I've only done a couple of multiple guns on one NICS, but it's delicious when it happens. I think the last time I did it, I bought a pair of revolvers. It was my two LCRs. I went into the shop. I had put a reserve down for the next time an LCR 357 came in, and when I got there, they had the 22 long rifle one in there too, and I went, you know what? Let's make it a twofer.
So, what is the weird beardiest revolver?
Well, how would you define that?
I would say I would ask you, of all the revolvers out there, which one speaks to you the most? If you could be in a revolver, Weird, what revolver would you be?
Oh, hands down, my Smith & Wesson 617. It is by far like the one of the nicest shooting revolvers. It's got 10 shots, so it holds as much as most semi-autos. And since you're not reloading magazines, it actually is considerably faster to burn through a whole bunch of ammo if you were just seeing how much time you could take to turn a 500 round brick into smoke and noise, of which I have done.
Really? So the weird beardiest revolver is in 22 long?
Yes.
Or long rifle, excuse me. Oh, I would not have expected that. Okay.
Yep, I'm actually posting it in chat. If you go to weirdworlds.com and type in there my most favorite guns I have, and I did this back in 2010, so this was an old post, and even then they're still these are two of my most favorite guns is my Smith & Wesson 617 revolver and my 5-inch Smith & Wesson 1911.
Okay, good to know.
Yes. So they're the most weird. I mean, it's Oddball mentioned that he saw a Smith & Wesson 617 in the used rack at his gun store, and I'm like, dude, buy it. Figure out a way to do it. Put it on your credit card. Go into debt. Like, go buy it. Because the only reason why these show up in the used rack is because somebody died. And like, yeah, same thing is one of those like, I suspect that my daughter will probably be more than happy to carry this 617 on to more glory after I slip this mortal coil. But yeah, it's the only way that these guns leave people's hands is because somebody died. Well, not speaking of somebody dying, but the death of the American collegiate system.
I mean, I feel like that's died long ago. So I posted this link, and it's to Twitter. And apparently, if you don't have a Twitter account, you can't read it, because Knitter is now dead, and I'm sorry. But I want to touch on this really briefly, because even though it isn't specifically about guns, it's about the zero tolerance hysteria that really categorizes gun prohibitionists. And so this was a series of 25 tweets, which was done by Dr. Leigh Johnson, who worked at Christian Brothers University, which I've never heard of before. And so she tweeted on, because I'm not going to say the other word. I don't even know what you do for X.
She twixt. I still like Twix.
Yeah.
They're delicious.
So on April 28th, she tweeted, starting my final week in the classroom tomorrow. It's been a good 20-year run. So she's got tenure. I want to point that out. And I think I made a positive impact on at least a few hundred students' lives. Plan on going out with a bang. Firecracker emoji.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why I specified that emoji is because that is, unfortunately, the crux of all of this. And so she goes in to teach her final class of not just the day, not just the semester, but of her entire teaching career at CBU. And she was pulled in by the dean, who told her, this will only take a minute. And so Dr. Johnson is walked down the hall to the dean's office, where she is met by not only one of the, they say VP. I don't know if that's vice principal. I mean, it's a college. I doubt it, but vice president doesn't make sense either.
I mean, there's university presidents, so there should be a vice president.
Okay. And a police officer. And so she was told she needed to have a seat because they needed to discuss something with her. And there's some back and forth, but she was shown the copy of her tweet, and she was asked to explain, and she went, explain what? And so it was suggested, because remember I said firecracker emoji, they were taking the position that her post indicated she was a threat to campus. And so Dr. Johnson very calmly says, are you not familiar with the common turn of phrase, go out with a bang? Meaning a celebratory end of something. And they go, well, yes, but. And the but is that she punctuated her post with a stick of dynamite, which indicated she was a threat. And so, yeah, she laughed at that. And then said, look, I don't have time to go around on this anymore. I've got a class to teach, and I'm already late. And so she goes, are we done here? And there was the typical, oh, no, you can't leave. I need you to explain this to me again. And she goes, oh, there's nothing I can say that will make this any clearer. And she turns to the police officer and says, do you think I'm a threat? And the fact that the police officer's response is to shrug and to defer to the faculty tells me that he didn't think she was a threat, but he was there because they called him to be there. So she talks to the VP, who's been doing most of the talking, and says, do you think I'm a threat? And he's like, I don't know, I need more explanation. And essentially, she just goes, look, I'm going to go back to teach my class. Y'all can wait until I'm done, or if you want to search my bag or search my car, you can do that, but I'm leaving. And she left. And she was allowed to leave. And the fact that she was allowed to walk out of the meeting and back into the classroom is really all the evidence that she wasn't actually a threat, but for whatever reason, you've heard of security theater. This was safety theater. Mm-hmm. Oh, there's a dynamite. That's a threat. And it's like, no, it's a firecracker. It's a turn of phrase. I mean, this is right up there with the whole suspending a boy, I think elementary school, maybe middle school, who, I think it was a Pop-Tart or whatever, but basically bit a pastry into the shape of a pistol and went pew-pew. And it was like, there's no possible way this could be threatening to anyone. Children are going to do childish things. And I don't know if they actually suspended him, but they were thinking about it. And it's this level of stupidity. And it's all performative. It's all... I hate using the word virtue signaling, but honestly, that's what it sounds like. And I can't even say that it's real hysteria, because if it had been actual hysteria, they would have had the officer, even if they couldn't arrest her, have the officer escort her off campus. And they didn't. And so, wrapping up here, Dr. Johnson believes that the reason for this is because, and I had to do some digging, and this was in a Facebook post, a whole bunch of tenured people were let go, and most of them signed a very broad NDA in exchange for a severance package. And this doctor decided she wasn't going to do that. Don't know why, doesn't matter. But because she refused to sign the NDA, her theory, and she's talking to a lawyer about this, so seems to think there's a case here, is that they wanted to shame her, to cast suspicion upon her, maybe to help stave off a potential lawsuit, which apparently they brought onto themselves now because of defamation. But still, and I realize I sound like I'm repeating myself, it gets back to the whole breathless hysteria of, you said something which could be vaguely interpreted as possibly slightly threatening if we stand on our head. And we've seen it done to gun owners, and we've seen it done to people who are completely innocent, and here we saw it happen to a tenured professor who used an emoji. I wish I could offer a solution as to how to fix this. it's just one more example that we are deep in the crazy times.
Yeah, and I posted a link to the boy. He was a second grader in Maryland, Annapolis, and he bit a Pop-Tart, and he was eating a Pop-Tart, and eventually he found out it was just the way he was eating it. It kind of looked like a gun, and the teachers took issue with this quote unquote gun, and I'm amazed by this, and Jeff Cooper, in his writings, talked about the term hoplophobia, the fear of guns and weapons, and it's one of those, like, people will talk about I'm not a homophobe, I'm not afraid of gay people, those sort of statements, but this is a legitimate phobia. Not legitimate in the fact that it's in the DSM. A lot of people, especially anti-gun people, when I bring up hoplophobia, will say it's not in the DSM, and I shrug that off. But I have absolutely had people with a straight face when I was doing my standard pro-gun talking points of you're using the term gun death as a relation for gun safety. Why is someone shot different than somebody who was stabbed to death, per se? And a rational person would say, well, I guess it isn't that different. A dead person's a dead person, and neither one of them's a good thing. But I have had a few people go, oh no, it's a huge difference. I mean, just it's with a gun, and you've got. I mentioned the story of the person who I picked up a package. I picked up a package for them and brought it over to them, and they said, "Oh yeah, could you open this for me? You've got a knife." And when I opened my knife, they physically recoiled at the click of the blade being deployed, and it's one of those, like, and the person actually asked me after I'd opened it, "Why do you always carry a knife? You asked me to open a package for you because you couldn't do it." Like, just this level, and this is still hoplophobia, because again, she drew a picture of a fire, she used an emoji for a firecracker as a celebration, and they took it as a stick of dynamite, which, let's be honest, yes, dynamite's still a thing, though most people don't use it anymore, but definitely very few people use the standard Visco fused dynamite from, like, the old Western movies. It's all being done with, like, blasting caps and electronic ignition and that sort of stuff. Like, what are we talking about here? It's so dumb. And the fact that it's from a college, it's from an institute of higher learning. One would think they would be smarter than that, and clearly they'd be wrong.
Well, I would like to point out that even though hoplophobia isn't in the DSM, I mean, phobia is the irrational fear of something. There are things that it is quite rational and sensible to be afraid of, as long as it isn't all-consuming. And so we have seen examples of people who are irrationally afraid of, for example, the knife you had. So, yeah, I was going to make a point. I don't remember what it was. It just circle back. It's like, it's all about being irrational.
Oh,
don't try to look for sense, because there is none.
And actually, interestingly enough, actually the same workplace where the person recoiled at my knife, I know that there happened to be a particular research group in there that was just a bunch of really, really toxic people. They were a bunch of backstabbing, and it was a really, really hostile work environment. And in the group, there were two people who were super duper underperforming and constantly, like, looking over other people's shoulders and acting like they weren't doing enough. I hate that kind of person. The person where they're screwing up and they're trying to point out where you're screwing up. And then there was one person who was looking to get out of it, was looking for other work anyway, and we knew that their time was limited there. And there was one person who was a good worker and a good actually, I think there was a couple of people that were senior, and they managed to get those people to transfer to another group, and then they just eliminated the funding for that group rather than try to come up with a means to fire the toxic people and get rid of them without lawsuits. And so I gotta wonder if they were also doing something like that, she wouldn't take the severance package, and so they were looking for a way to just drum her out just to get rid of her. Mm-hmm. And try to press the issue of you were doing explosives, and maybe she'd get mad or offended and start screaming and yelling and see, now you're bad.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I mean, it couldn't have been that good of a decision because their initial plan was so stupid. I was gonna that works for the next story that I've got in the lineup. So, but you know what? I'm gonna do it. I'm gonna mix up the show notes. Speaking of stupid, Maine, my home state where I was born, has gone full stupid, and I'm really upset with that. Ryan Machad and I sat down for Handgun Radio and talked about this in a rare break from our non-talking about politics on Handgun Radio. But again, this is really nonpartisan, super disappointing. But we mentioned it a few shows ago. Governor Janet Mills was urging on an anti-gun bill. I note that Janet Mills is a Democrat, and she is a true Democrat, and she has actually been very, very good on the Second Amendment until now. And she has signed into a suite of gun safety laws that are standard boilerplate, and they're in the wake of the Lewiston shooting, and they would have done nothing. So the bill is, let's see, it's essentially a ban on private sales, essentially among strangers. I believe you're only allowed to transfer privately through direct family members on there. And of course, note that the Lewiston shooter bought his firearms at a gun shop. They're adding a waiting period to the transfer of a firearm from a gun shop. Note that the Lewiston shooting the Lewiston shooter had the gun for months and months before before deciding to use it for murder. And I think there was one more. Oh yes, an expansion of the yellow flag laws in the state, to which I note that they used it against him, and they just decided that they went to his house and they knocked on his door, and he didn't answer the door, and so they just decided to go away because they were serving someone who might be a danger to himself and others, and they didn't want to get in on that. So this is awful, and I hope that there is enough of a backlash within Maine to punish the legislators that push this through, and maybe convince Janet Mills to go back to the way she was. I can't be so harsh as to say that doing this after all of the times when she has pushed back against gun control makes her forever evil and needs to be pushed out. But this is unforgivable, and this is terrible, and this is not going to save any lives, and it's just going to make life in Maine worse and potentially more dangerous because, again, gun control laws almost always lead to more deaths.
Well, I know that Maine has a very strong tradition of hunting.
Mm-hmm.
And so like I said, I'm not at my best. Are these laws going to affect the traditional hunters and fowlers?
I believe not. I think that there is a cutout for like lending a firearm to a fellow hunter and that sort of stuff. So it should be relatively fine for that sort of stuff. It's really more this is going to be a pain in the butt for the for the gun nuts, really, for the people that are doing a lot of buying and selling of firearms.
Okay. Well, the main reason I asked is because if you infringe upon the hunters and sport shooters, that's really what gets the uproar, and that might force a change of mind, a change of legislation.
Yeah. Oh, for sure. That's certainly one of those things of the Second Amendment's not about hunting and all of that, and the quote unquote FUDs are not really moving the needle all that much. But if you can get the shooters and the Second Amendment people to also join forces with the sportsmen, like that's a big lockstep group. But speaking of joining forces, there's my transition. This is kind of a feel good story, I guess you could say. In Pennsylvania, there was a church service going on, and for reasons that really haven't been explained, I believe the person was struggling with mental illness, got up in the middle of the service and pointed a gun at the pastor and pulled the trigger, and the firearm did not work. And then somebody from the parish jumped in and got them. The pastor also jumped in.
The cameraman, because we have this on film because you had someone working a video camera right in the aisle.
Oh, that's awesome.
And so he was already standing, pretty much had a straight shot. Mm-hmm. And so for people who haven't seen the video, you've got the pastor. He's not specifically at the pulpit, but he's in the, I think it's called the nave. I'm not entirely sure. But, okay, for anyone who's been in a typical Protestant church, you've got the communion rail, you've got a few steps, and then that platform where you've got the two different lecterns, the pulpit for the preacher, and then the other one for the lay reader, and then behind that is the altar. And so he's in that interim space on the platform between the two pulpits, and he's preaching. And so the perpetrator walks in from the right and points a gun at him, and he's got a shooting style which I haven't seen outside of like World War II training videos, because he is bladed, and he's got his right arm extended out, not in front of him, to the side. He's presenting a very thin profile. Mm-hmm. And he pulls the trigger, and you know what? We're in a church. We'll just say that a miracle happened, and the gun did not fire. And so the pastor who, when the gun was pointing at him, flinched. And then I guess when he realized that the gun didn't fire, he ran and hid behind the pulpit. So the gunman, who is a rather tall man, just begins to step over the communion rail. And he's either finished stepping or is about halfway through when you see the cameraman just do a running tackle. And he tackles the guy from behind, and the gunman was still mid-step, so he was off balance. And the gunman just face plants with the cameraman on top of him, and they wrestle for a bit. But because the cameraman acted with surprise and violence of action, he was able to almost envelop the guy, because the cameraman looks pretty stocky and the gunman looks tall and thin. And so he's got the gunman tied up as he sits on the steps, and then the preacher comes over and I guess helps pry his hands off the gun.
It looks like he starts to try to do like a rear naked choke and then just strips the gun out of his hands.
Could be. I'm not that familiar with that sort of thing. The last thing that I thought was very interesting, I believe it was the cameraman who had possession of the firearm, and he was gesturing with it in a way that made me uncomfortable. He wasn't very obviously pointing it at people, but neither did he have it pointed at the ground. But I will note that his index finger is not only is it very clearly off the trigger, it's up so high I can see it on the slide. So, I can forgive, like, in the heat of the moment, he may not be observing, I can't remember which one of Cooper's rules it is, but, he's definitely got his finger off the trigger. And so that is, while it's not perfect gun handling, in the wake of preventing a murder and adrenaline is high, I will allow it. Who knows? At that point, people in the congregation may have fled, and so there's no one in front of where he is. But it's still, it's a very impressive performance all around. I really encourage our listeners to go to the website and watch the video, because again, the entire thing was filmed, and it's really impressive.
Yeah, and I can't resist, Aaron, but you say it was imperfect gun handling. I will note that in that point where he is handling the gun, you get a pretty good look at it, and I'm almost positive that gun is a Raven, and so therefore it is imperfect gun handling, but it is also an imperfect gun.
Well, I think we've determined why it didn't fire.
Yes. I don't own a Raven, though if one was in the gun case when I walked into a gun shop, the chances of me walking out without it is extremely small, because everybody knows my love, how much of a trash panda I am when it comes to gun shops, especially handguns. But yeah, in all seriousness, I am laughing at the piece of trash pot metal gun that the guy has, and they are well known for jamming, especially if they're not really well cleaned. But this is exactly what you need to do. Like, I need to sing high praise to the cameraman and to the pastor, because they acted swiftly, and that's exactly what you need to do, because God forbid, I don't know if he had chambered a round or if he had a dud round or just a bad primer strike or what the heck was going on with this gun, but there's a good chance that he could have gotten it fixed. He could have gotten the gun back into action. And so by tackling him and bringing him down and stripping that gun out of his hand, you made sure that that was the end of the fight. And again, hate to say this for, just for the fact that it's just such a crappy decision, but if you are in a situation where somebody is attempting a spree killing and you happen to be unarmed, whether it be because you decided you didn't want to bring your gun that day, or more likely because the area forbids guns and you're following the rules while they are not, chances are you're in big trouble. So at least things are going to work out better if you start charging the gunman and really trying to put as much hurt on them as possible.
Plus, it's just a really beautiful tackle. Take a look.
Yeah. It is really good. And speaking of beautiful, Aaron,
why, thank you.
Here is your charm knows no end, but I am actually not talking about your radiant beauty, Aaron, but I am talking about our friends from Bellevue, Washington, with the Second Amendment Foundation. We have a press release, and the news is good news. And that is two of the cases that the Second Amendment Foundation has been pushing have been picked up for review by the Supreme Court. Hopefully, at least one of them will be chosen. One of them is the Harrell v. Raoul case out of, is that the Maryland case? I forget which one is Illinois and which one is Maryland, but it's Harrell versus Raoul and Bianchi versus Frosch. And
Kwame Raoul is the Attorney General of Illinois.
Okay, awesome. So these are the cases of, one is against Illinois' assault weapons ban, and the other one is against Maryland's magazine ban. or actually, no, Maryland also has an assault weapons ban. So these are coming after really a cancer that's just been plaguing the country since like the 80s, I think, was when California had their first assault weapons ban. And it's just been going downhill. And I happen to be under an assault weapons ban. And I mentioned that two of my favorite guns are a 10-shot revolver and a single stack 45. So, yeah, I might, my behaviors might be dictated by law. See, it would be wonderful. I mean, in my opinion, it's pretty clear cut, especially given the NYSERPA test that, these rules are, I mean, not even the NYSERPA test, but by the Heller rule on the in common use. I mean, you don't get anything more common than AR-15s and the connected 30-round magazines.
And the irony of all of this is that had it not been for the assault weapons ban in the 90s, where Americans bought AR-15s because they were told they couldn't have it, I don't know if an AR-15 would be considered in common use. I mean, probably would, considering that we've got a lot of veterans who used M16s and M4s, and they already have the manual of arms. But prior to all of that, M16s AR-15 ownership really could have been a footnote, but the assault weapons ban really energized people to go, well, you don't want me to have it, so now I want to own it. So to a certain extent, the anti-gunners played themselves.
I mean, it's certainly supercharged it. I mean, I got to say, despite my gun hipsterism, the AR-15 platform is an amazing platform, and its utility cannot be disputed. So eventually people would figure out just how amazing it is. I mean, you look at the, 70s and 80s, the popularity of the M1 carbine as a handy and tactical weapon, and really the AR-15 is just the next evolution of that.
I can already hear Oddball going, "Oh, but common use shouldn't be the only key." And yeah, you're right, but it is a good first step.
Yeah, I'm, and he's 100% right, and that is correct. I mean, because it's a serious catch-22, because it was essentially kind of a way of saying, well, let's make sure that people don't think that people can own machine guns under the Second Amendment, because that is what the law says. And before the NFA went through, yeah, you could mail order a machine gun for like 30 years because the Maxim was invented, and then it took them a while before they passed the NFA. But it's still, even it's under the NYSERPA test, it's a slam dunk. But even under the Heller test, it's a slam dunk. So when you're coming up with multiple avenues to attack its inconstitutionality, those are good odds. So the only really thing that I think is going against us is if SCOTUS doesn't pick it up, which I hope they do, especially given how obnoxious all of the states, especially New York, who was directly the defendant in NYSERPA v. Bruin, has been for the Supreme Court saying, leave it alone. That I hope SCOTUS picks this up, and I hope they're spicy.
Okay, well, going from spicy SCOTUS to a person who's about as spicy as mayonnaise. Yes, it's part 2 of Weird Fisking David Hogg.
So this is part 2 of the excellent debate between David Hogg and Spike Cohen at Dartmouth College in New Hampshire. As I said last time, this is one of the best debates I've ever seen, and both people were respectful to each other and to the rules. Still, I also mentioned last week, the reason why I'm doing this is because David Hogg said some of the dumbest stuff I've heard from an upper-tier gun control advocate in a long time. And while Spike was very respectful of Hogg, I don't have to be. So let's pick up where we left off.
Let's just, for a second, to answer the arming teacher's question, how many of you have ever had an argument with your teacher or professor? How would you feel if that person had a Glock 19, right? Well, good for you, sir. I don't think most of the students in this room, and I'm sure there are some that don't agree, but the reality is human beings are incredibly emotional and stupid creatures, and adding guns into these situations is going to make it deadly.
This is one of those issues that clearly makes so much sense that the anti-gun people opposed to it have to tell a massive lie to make it look reasonable. The big lie is that they don't call it repeal of the Gun-Free School Zone Act, because that would bring up what a wreck that law was. It was a reaction to the Cleveland Elementary School shooting in Stockton, California. By the way, this also led to the assault weapons ban in California, which is the first of its kind in the United States. But really, at this time, school shootings were very rare, and this law was signed in 1990 by President Bill Clinton, still the most anti-gun president in U.S. history. And school shootings continued to be rare, until 1999 when Columbine happened. Of course, I believe the Gun-Free School Zone Act was the fertile soil for the massive increase of school shootings. But the true growth factor was the fact that the shooters' faces were on every newscast and newspaper and magazine for months. Many of the copycats that came out later made it clear that they desired the same level of fame. Instead of talking about ending the prohibition of firearms at public schools, they call it, like Hogg did, arming teachers. Like teachers are being issued guns and required to carry them like beat cops or soldiers. On a similar vein to this, you hear people talking about individual teachers who have no desire to carry a gun. And that's fine. We don't demand people carry guns, and it's foolish to if they don't want to. We just want people who do want to carry guns not to be prohibited, especially since that emboldens killers. But the core of his argument is the most pathetic. Have you ever had an argument with a teacher? Yes. Yes, I have. Really, I think everybody has. But the statement that a gun would change this dynamic is ridiculous. I've had arguments with people while I was carrying a gun. I didn't shoot anybody. Sounds like somebody in the audience claims to have had a gun when arguing with a teacher. And I'll note that Dartmouth College is a private school, so while they do forbid weapons of any kind on campus, they aren't bound by the Gun-Free School Zone Act. And New Hampshire doesn't have binding signage. So if somebody was to legally carry on campus, the worst they could do is get a trespass and an expulsion. Still, Hogg gives the impression that violence can only come from the barrel of a gun. I started carrying a pocket knife in college. I never stabbed another teacher or a classmate. Most people have never been assaulted by a teacher. I was, technically. A teacher shoved me around once, and I'll note that this teacher was also violating school policy while being drunk while teaching. Either way, the idea that suddenly if we allow people to carry guns on campus, the intellectual discussion will erupt in gunfire is as stupid as when states were rolling back their concealed carry laws and the pearl-clutching idiots said, "There'll be blood in the streets! People will shoot each other over parking spots!" And just like the many school districts that have rolled back this rule, they'll be just as right if we ever do this on the federal level.
I don't care how much training somebody has, even law enforcement officers, you cannot train out instincts from them, and you can't train out the fact that, did anybody see recently at a Chipotle, somebody got their order wrong and a guy pulled out a gun on the manager? When you're adding more guns into our society, that is far more, statistically speaking, what is going to happen than people just reasonably having them and being calm. Because people have road rage, people are emotional, and even if they're well-trained, which I know is not necessarily what Spike is advocating for unless it's by a non-government agency, I don't want to mischaracterize what you're saying, you're going to have more instances of gun violence. It's just what's going to happen.
So does Hogg think the cops shouldn't have guns either? Where does the idiocy end here? I searched for this Chipotle video, and I couldn't find anything that happened recently. But I'd imagine if somebody pulls a gun on somebody over a food order, they'd be facing felony assault charges at best. And that's illegal. And they will be facing prison time and the loss of their rights for life. What's hilarious is that Hogg is essentially saying, because people break the law, the solution is more laws. I bet he wouldn't even grasp how ironic that was if I explained it to him. His logical disconnect is that strong.
I mean, the fact of the matter is, I don't know about you all, but last I heard, schools in Europe are also gun-free zones. When was the last time that we heard about a school shooting there? Maybe it's because they don't have guns nearly as much as we do. Just saying.
This debate was on April 10th. And on April 2nd of this same year, there was a shooting at a school in a suburb of Helsinki, Finland. Of course, U.S. news doesn't give much airtime to spree-killing events in Europe because Europe has stricter gun laws than even Hogg's beloved Massachusetts or the state where he was born, which is California. Still, Aaron and I cover mass casualty events outside the U.S. all the time, if for no other reason than to combat this pervasive myth that spree killings are somehow a uniquely American experience.
Guess what? Even if a state has stronger gun laws, you can easily traffic it from another state because of our lack of federal gun laws. But you know what could do something about that? Something like a 1 gun per month policy that makes it a lot harder and uneconomical to transport guns into a place like D.C. and sell them on the street.
Another pervasive lie, the iron pipeline. Yep, the reason why states with strict gun control laws are awash in gun violence is not because when politicians push gun control, they waste time and resources that could be used to enact laws that make the public safer, or that overall gun control laws correlate with a rise in violent crime. Oh, no. It's because criminals go on the road trips down to gun-friendly states. Note, these criminals are never caught down there buying or transporting guns. Ignore that fact. And then they sell those guns on the streets of the gun control utopias. Go check the show notes. I have the latest ATF gun trace data. It's for 2022, which is the most recent year available. And these data packets are sorted by states. And they have the states where the guns were traced to. And they have what's called a time to crime number, which is the number of years a firearm has been in the wild since the last point of contact with an FFL. I decided to pick the 4 states that were relative to David Hogg just for illustrations. I picked California because that's where Hogg was born and that's where his dad was an FBI agent. Florida, which is where Hogg lived when his school was attacked and made his first contact with the agents of Michael Bloomberg and was recruited into the gun control movement. Massachusetts, which is not only where I live, but also where Hogg lived when he was attending Harvard University. And the District of Columbia, which is where he lives now. Now, the district is a little funny as there's no gun shops there, and only one FFL who only transfers guns. So guns don't actually trace to DC. But every other state, the number one supplier of trace guns is the state itself by a very large margin. And just because there are tons of other traces that trace to different states, that isn't due to an iron pipeline, but due to those time to crime numbers. If you look, the national average is 6.3 years, which means either the iron pipeline exists in very, very small numbers, or the criminals are sitting on guns that they're aging like bourbon before selling them. And talk to distillers. Aging bourbon is a good way to go broke because the whiskey makes you zero money until you bottle it and sell it. Hence why most places also make gin, vodka, and beer for immediate sale. Or it might mean that the iron pipeline, like every other talking point of gun controls, is a lie. See, these numbers just show that people move around and guns get stolen from time to time. So yeah, what are the other time to crime numbers? California, 9 years. Florida, 6.5 years. Massachusetts, almost 8 years. And DC, almost 6 years. And DC was the only one in the group I looked up that was faster than the national average. I wonder if that has to do with the DC police dealing guns to criminals. Check the show notes for that story.
Well, for one, I think we need to understand that there are different ways that you could define an assault weapon. The way that I would typically characterize it, more broadly speaking, is a semi-automatic rifle capable of taking a high-capacity magazine, somewhere in the range of, 30 rounds or more than 10 rounds. My apologies.
Even this slip of the tongue is unreasonable. Capable of accepting a 30-round magazine still means everything, because even the German Luger of 1908, while it took a standard flush-fit magazine of 8 rounds, the Germans did issue 32-round drum mags for trench raids in World War I. If the gun has a detachable magazine, a 30-plus round magazine could be made for it. And even guns with fixed magazines could be modified to take detachable magazines. Think about the 30-round SKS magazines that you see in any gun catalog. But that was the slip of the tongue. He meant 10, an arbitrary number made up by gun grabbers before David Hogg was even born. Essentially, he wants to ban all modern semi-auto rifles. And while he doesn't mention pistols, it begs the question of why not pistols too? And all just to make David Hogg and Big Daddy Michael Bloomberg happy. But even that's a lie, because look at UK and their knife bans, and Australia trying to push stricter gun bans as well as knife bans. It never stops. They will never be content.
That is how I define it. And the reason why I define it that way is because what makes these guns especially lethal, for anybody that has shot them before, you will understand why a rifle is far more lethal. It's easier to aim, and especially because of the high-capacity magazines, that is just not really practical with a lot of things like a handgun and the increased accuracy of a gun like the AR-15 in comparison to a Glock 19 or a Sig Sauer handgun, for example, or something like that. it is just far more lethal. Not to mention that the bullets themselves are traveling at typically three times faster. Like a 5.56 is going to be going way faster than a 9mm round. And just in terms of the pure physics of that, it is way more damaging to human tissue. But both are obviously still lethal, to be clear.
When Hogg or any other gun banner says lethal, they mean effective. And of course, he cites little ballistics here. But I have to wonder if he only knows the stats of 9mm and 5.56, because 5.56 is an intermediate cartridge, which is why it's great for home defense. It can't effectively ring steel at 1,000 yards, but it can incapacitate a home invader with a few shots. But the rounds quickly lose stability as they hit wall boards or beams, making overpenetration less of a concern than, say, a .308 or even buckshot. And all the added ease of shooting and accuracy is nothing but a good thing. But Hogg isn't trying to explain why assault weapons bans make sense. He's trying to evoke enough fear that you will no longer listen to reason and submit to his requests.
Because I want to be clear, it's important that somebody, if their life is in danger, that they are able to defend themselves. But a lot of the stories that the NRA is telling us about that to make up these statistics, saying that there are millions of instances of this, there was one of them that I saw where it was to defend somebody's property from a wild boar in Texas. I would not necessarily consider that defending yourself publicly from, it's a mischaracterization of acting like, oh, it's just all these criminals that are being stopped.
He wants people to defend himself, just with weapons he thinks are effective. Of course, he doesn't know an AR from an FN SCAR, so clearly we should listen to him. Also, if a wild boar charging you or family members, or is it attacking pets or livestock, that's not an illegitimate defensive gun use? This is like the Kellermann study, where only the events that happened inside the home and produced a dead body counted as a defensive gun use. And a wounded attacker, just a display of a firearm, or even an event that happened outside the home. Oh no, those didn't count. Same here, I guess, with defending yourself from dangerous animals. It can't be counted as defensive gun use. Again, anti-gunners are cooking the numbers. What a surprise.
Yeah, I think if somebody doesn't want a gun in their household because it was passed down to them, there should be a clear set. People are unfortunately not born naturally understanding how to handle firearms properly. And I think it would be great if everybody did know how to do that, especially in a country with so many guns in the first place. But it's important to acknowledge that that is just not the case, right? And even if it was, if somebody doesn't want to have a firearm in their household because they have kids or whatever other reason, there should be a clear, straightforward way for them to remove that firearm from their house and give it back with a financial incentive from the government.
Okay, this might be the dumbest thing for this Fisk. Now, Hogg has a fair point. People who aren't educated in how to safely use guns probably shouldn't have them in the home. Hence why we should educate public school students on how to safely handle and use firearms in age-appropriate lessons. Because educated or not, it's our right to own a firearm. Plus, even if you don't own any guns, the chances of you being someplace where there are guns in modern America are near zero. He mentions if people inherit guns that they don't want, that's why they need gun buyback, so they can get them out of the house safely. What? I mean, you understand you can call the police and arrange for them to remove unwanted guns from your house. But if you're not a chump or an idiot, rather than getting a $50 Target gift card for Grandpa's 1950 Winchester Model 70, you could take it to a gun store and sell it, for cash, and probably a lot more than $50. Gun buybacks are worthless, and even the anti-gun people know this, and trying to sell such crap is simply embarrassing.
Because, while I don't know about those statistics that you brought up about the murder rate, we do know that having a firearm in your household makes suicide in that house 5 times more likely than if that firearm was not there.
Did I mention the Kellermann study? This was a study done by his co-author, and he claimed that guns cause suicide, which is crazy easy to disprove since no other nation has as many guns in private hands as Americans. Yet we're right in the middle as far as suicide rates go, even factoring in the nations that have the dubious statistics of 0 suicides.
We also know that children are often accessing these firearms because they're not properly stored, because these individuals don't store them because they think, oh, I need to be able to access this in the moment where somebody is breaking into my house, when the reality is a lot of the time it's a lot more likely that a child in your house gets a hold of that gun than you successfully defending yourself against it.
This is actually true, and it can be much better solved by education than by gun control. Hey, if you have young people in your home or frequent visitors, there are quick access safes you could tuck your handguns or even rifles into in the event of a break-in. By the way, places like Massachusetts require guns to be locked up at all times, even if all the residents of the home are shooters. So don't be fooled that this is some sort of youth safety law. It's about banning guns and making defensive gun uses harder to do.
In many instances where we do have guns that are out there, like the instance of the shooter at my high school, he had the police called on him multiple times to his school, to his house. He was known to threaten to shoot up my high school. He was reported to law enforcement. And in part because we did not have that red flag law in place, we were not able to temporarily remove his firearms.
As we talked about in part 1, the killer at Hogg's school committed multiple felonies and dozens of cases of domestic violence. And any one of these would remove his right to own a gun and likely to put him in jail. But none of that was done. So he was free, and this illustrates the effectiveness of gun laws.
Do we need to increase the minimum age for purchasing some types of firearms? I believe we do. I don't think that if you can't have a beer when you're 18, you shouldn't be able to have an AR-15. And by the way, right now, under current federal law, the shooter at my high school would not have been able to buy from an FFL, federally licensed dealer, would not have been able to purchase a handgun because he was not over 21, but he was able to purchase an AR-15. That doesn't make sense to me, personally. And I know that Spike will say something about hunting or some other vague libertarian point, but I just don't think that that makes sense, personally.
The shooter at your school should have never been able to buy any guns had the police done their jobs. So changing the laws does nothing. Further, the other side of your argument is either you're an adult or you're an adult. Meaning that either we change everything and make 21 the new age of majority and take away all the rights from people under 21, or we stop being strange and allow the same people we trust to vote, enter the military, sign binding contracts, get married, buy whatever guns they want, and drink and smoke whatever they want, because this picking and choosing crap makes zero sense.
You're setting a dangerous precedent if we want to talk about instances where certain laws have failed, because in that case, I can talk about every murder that's happened in the United States in states with permitless carry over and over again, right? Like, that is a logical fallacy. Is any law perfect? No, by no means. I will be the first to admit no law is perfect, but there's a reason we still have laws.
Says the man who keeps talking about the killer at his high school that law enforcement ignored. Also, he's not playing fair talking about murders in constitutional carry states, because constitutional carry doesn't exempt prohibited people from carrying. How many murders every year are done by people who can't legally own guns?
I think if there is somebody that's threatening to shoot up a high school, I don't think that they should necessarily, be given a court date immediately and then have their firearm removed later on. That's an immediate and present threat to the community, and that person should have their firearms removed and be given due process after that. That's what I was getting at earlier. I don't think that's an affront to anybody's civil liberties. I think that helps protect all of us in the first place.
This is not a case for red flag laws. This is a case for criminal law. While red flag laws can disarm and violate people over hearsay, slander, and allegations, criminal laws can disarm and detain people for threatening people or committing violent acts. But we learned from Parkland, this is only as good as the police that enforce the law.
The ultimate violation on all of our liberties is death. And the current state of affairs that we have in America right now is one where we are far more likely than almost any other developed country to die from gun violence or gun suicide even than those other countries. And I think that doing the same common thing that we have been isn't going to solve that. And I agree in some respects with what you're saying of how we have to address why people pick up a gun, but I think we can't just do that. We need to address both.
Any other developed country is just cherry picking to make it appear that the U.S. is a super dangerous country. In fact, we're one of the safest countries in the world, and the difference between the United States and Canada and Western Europe is purely academic compared to the massive levels of violence in South and Central America, Eastern Europe, Africa, parts of Asia. Further, by focusing on gun violence or gun deaths, it ignores the massive knife violence problem in many parts of the world and make it appear like gun control improves public safety. And all of this is said by a man who lives in Washington, D.C., where even after the Heller decision, the gun laws are painfully strict. And it's still one of the murder capitals of the United States. And he's in New Hampshire, where half the audience is probably packing guns. And this is literally the safest state in the United States.
We believe that it is important to address these high-powered rifles that have enabled the state to be militarized as an excuse in the first place. Because part of the reason why the state became so militarized as it is today is because of multiple, there was one instance, I forget the exact name of it, but there was an instance in the 90s, it was a pretty infamous armed robbery in Los Angeles where the assailants were heavily armed and outgunned the police. And that enabled the police to have the justification to arm themselves even more and continue taking a lot of the military surplus in the first place. So I think part of that conversation is about de-escalating the arms race that we're in.
Not only does David Hogg not know the name of the North Hollywood shootout, but he's wrong on the facts. First up, the shooters were using full auto weapons, not off-the-shelf civilian rifles. And they had body armor. This didn't start an arms race, but instead showed a weak spot in police equipment, as the officers responding were carrying revolvers and maybe a few shotguns. As soon as the police borrowed several hunting rifles from the local gun shop, they were able to wound the robbers and put an end to the shootout. This had nothing to do with fighting rifles with rifles, but the innate effectiveness of rifles over handguns, and the precision they offer over shotguns. And they need to be dishonest about this because the average beat cop is going to use their weapons for the exact same reason you or I will, to defend themselves or to defend innocent lives around them. And if police feel that they need to use magazines that hold more than 10 rounds and keep an AR-style carbine handy, well then we probably have the same need too.
The part that I don't agree with in particular is this idea that having more guns out there is just going to make us inevitably safer for the reasons that I stated earlier. I mean, I've seen so many customer service disputes where I know it would have been not unlikely that a shooting could have happened there if both individuals were armed, right? Like there's so many instances like this that we see all the time, whether it's road rage, whether it's bar fights, whether it's anything like that. And if you add guns into that situation, it's going to make it more lethal. And that's not even having a discussion of whether or not we should have guns in our society or not.
Yes, we are a country of laws, and one of those laws reads, a well-regulated militia being necessary to the security of a free state, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. We really can't talk about being a lawful society when you are working for a group that's directly violating the law, not only the very basic tenet of the Second Amendment, but also states like New York, who are directly ordered by the Supreme Court to stop infringing on the rights of its residents and has openly refused to do so. The anti-gun people told us there would be blood in the streets if we allowed people to carry concealed, and people would be shooting each other over parking spots. And not only did this prediction not come true, but almost always public safety went up. It's extra ironic that Hogg mentions bar fights in New Hampshire, where constitutional carry is the law of the land, and there are no restrictions on carrying firearms in establishments that serve alcohol. And it's in fact the safest state in the Union. And after this debate, David Hogg went back to his home in Washington, D.C., with extremely restrictive gun laws and extremely high violent crime. But who are you going to believe? David Hogg or your lying eyes? Those are your anti-gun talking points and a few rebuttals to combat them. I hope you didn't mind me splitting this up into two parts, Aaron.
Yeah, actually I did, because after the day I've had, you forced me to listen to that, and it's just, no. There's a term in German, and I'm gonna butcher it, but it's something like, Backpfeifengesicht, or something like that, and it essentially means a person who has a punchable face. It's like, I don't like you, I don't really know why I don't like you, I just know that I want to punch you, and David Hogg's voice does that to me. It's like chewing on tinfoil. And you made me listen to that.
Yeah.
Now, your Fisk of it was very, very good. Please don't get me wrong. I've saved the script. But I had to wade through him first, and I hated every second of it.
But can we take a brief moment and just note that David Hogg says we need to have gun buybacks because how else are people going to get rid of guns that they don't want? I'm always amazed by that when they interview the people at, in the gun buyback lives. I mean, I haven't seen it in years because now it's like people with just file boxes filled with 3D printed liberators. and people buying like every piece of trash gun from like 6 counties over on the, all right, whatever you have that I could get for under $25. Here, get rid of this. I don't want it. And,
the only way that works is if they are so hoplophobic that either it never occurs to them to sell it at a gun store, or the thought of going to a gun store is so utterly repellent to their core values that they could never do such a thing. And therefore they have to have an alternate means, and that alternate means is the government. But then, as you say, you can just call the cops who will come and take it away from you. Mm-hmm. So if you really hate guns and don't want to make a single cent on it, you can surrender them to the police. They'll be happy to take them away.
I remember a number of years ago, I watched a news coverage of a gun buyback. I believe it was in New Jersey. And this guy came in and it showed him unloading his gun. And he had like a pump action shotgun and maybe 2 bolt action rifles or something like that. And they were in really, really good shape. And he got like probably like $150 worth of gift cards for it. And he was just like super proud of himself. He goes, "Oh yeah, no, I used to hunt. I haven't hunted in years." And they were just collecting dust in the closet. And so I thought now is the time to get rid of them. And now I'm going to go home and I'm going to take my wife out to dinner. And I think she's going to be pretty happy. And all I could think of is imagine if somebody could say, "Oh, you got $150 night out, meal out on the town," when your husband probably could have gotten like close to $1,000 for those 3 guns, if not more. I mean, like I said, it wasn't close enough to see if there was any. It didn't look like there was anything like super bespoke. Like there wasn't like a Browning Sweet Auto 5 Sweet 16 or something like that that's going to pull down some pretty big numbers. But it still was one of those like old walnut stocked firearms from the before times, before things got real. Everything was being cheaped out on. I got to imagine that he could have walked into a gun shop and without too much effort walked out with like add a 0 onto that number and you would have been just fine. And I wonder how his wife would have felt about that if he just "Oh yeah, no, I flushed $800 down the toilet." So yeah, gun buybacks. Like hilariously, David Hogg I didn't mention this, but David Hogg went to Harvard, and actually Harvard did a study and found that gun buybacks do no good.
Is that linked in the show notes?
No, but it'll be there. It'll be there.
It will be. So weird. Yeah, it's going to be clunky as hell, but whatever. So weird. Do you know who else is there for us?
Oh, that would be our lovely, lovely listeners. Each and every one of them. Thank you guys so much for joining us for another great episode of the Assorted Calibers podcast. But I would be remiss not to give a very special thanks to our supporters on Patreon. So you can our Patreon patron, go to patreon.com/AssortedCalibersPodcast to sign up. It's not a charity. It is simply a place where we sell some extra stuff, like early release of the podcast, or we have our ACP blooper reels where you can get like the full story on Aaron's router problems and hear us saying a bunch of bad words. We got the ACP film tracks where we're watching fine movies. We've got like several hundred now. There's a huge catalog of movies that you can join us for, and the ACP Mag Dump.
You said fine movies, but I know full well Oddball's taste in cinema, and fine is not a word I would use.
You have not sat through the joys that are Llamageddon and Blood Orgy at Beaver Lake.
Yes.
But I will say we did do one film track night where we watched the 1986 RoboCop and the 2014 RoboCop back to back, and I got to tell you that is a cinematic experience.
It's really been that long?
Yes, since the reboot RoboCop came out. Yeah, that was a while ago.
been 10 years.
Oh,
Good
yeah.
God.
There's so many times when we're doing an ACP film track, and I'm like, all right, cool. We're doing kind of a new release here, and realize like the new release is 10 years old. Oh boy. Yeah, we just recently did Looper, and I'm like, oh yeah, this is a pretty new movie. Well, I mean, first up, Bruce Willis was still doing movies. He's retired now, and yeah, that was. I think that was like 2014 as well. Maybe older than that.
Well, when you aren't listening to the podcast or watching our film tracks, please remember to rate us on Apple Podcasts, subscribe to us on the platform of your choice. We recommend Pocket Casts, and share the show with your friends, both online and off.
I get a blog. It's weirdworld.com. That's WEERDworld.com. And you can hear me weekly on Handgun Radio on the Firearms Radio Network.
And you can get more from me when I can find it in me to write and have an internet connection at linktree/Aaron Paulette. That's linktree.e/Aaron Paulette, all one word. I didn't get an E out of you, mister.
You did. It's there. You just didn't hear it.
You watch your ass.
You listen to the show, which you won't do, but it's there.
I was doing Blazing Saddles. Harumph, harumph, harumph. I didn't get a harumph out of that guy.
We gotta save our phony baloney jobs. And thanks to Nate Spencer for our music.
Oh boy, I've either got nothing or it's just gonna be gibberish. I prefer lentils to chickpeas, but Weird has never had a woman lentil on his face. Good night, everyone. Good night.